Broadcasting live from our studio in Boston, Solutions Review is proud to showcase Rubrik in the Solutions Spotlight, a unique online event for industry professionals.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to the Solutions Spotlight featuring Rubrik and an in-depth look at their Zero Trust data security platform. For organizations looking to develop a rock-solid data security posture, the days of simple backup and disaster recovery are coming to an end. Right now, the key term to get familiar with is data resiliency, an approach which allows you to have data always available and accessible despite unexpected business disruptions such as cyber attacks. With that in mind, today we're looking at how the Rubrik Security Cloud can organize all of your business information and leverage zero trust data protection to detect and recover from ransomware, reduce sensitive data exposure, and protect cloud workloads. And joining us from London to walk us through the Rubrik solution is Phil McGowan, Cybersecurity Sales Engineer. Phil, thanks for being with us.
Hi. Hi, Doug.
It's great that you're here. Rubrik is a solution that we've been covering for a long time now, and it's also a solution that we're really excited about having in our spotlight. And it's chiefly around what I was just talking about in my introduction, this idea of really trying to take your cybersecurity to the next level. And I know you've got a lot to walk through, but before you do that, give me a little bit more about yourself. I know you're relatively new to Rubrik, but certainly not relatively new to this space. You've been talking to a lot of folks, and you've been at other solutions. Tell me a little bit about the opportunity that you've seen at Rubrik.
Sure. So I've worked for a number of years as a sales engineer across different technologies. So I started off as a sales engineer working with business continuity and disaster recovery technology. So really, taking backup and using it in anger to get customers' data back. And then from there, I moved into cybersecurity. I worked for the last 3 years or so with a company called Proofpoint, focusing on a range of different security tools around email, insider threat, cloud security. And for me personally, what I saw as an opportunity with Rubrik is combining those two areas. Rubrik is very much a data security company, so they take those two different elements and really merge them together, not just backing up our customers' data, but also keeping that data secure. And that's some of the things we'll get into today.
Yeah, no, I know, and I'm excited about that because this is something that so many people are coming to Solutions Review to learn more about, not only the Rubrik solution but the broader strategic challenge of data resiliency and backup and disaster recovery. So before I turn it over to you, I'll just let everybody know that if you have any questions, you can submit them, and I'll hang on to them here until Phil's completed walking through the solution and sharing a little bit more about Zero Trust. And then I'll jump in probably in about 40 minutes or so, Phil, and we'll go through some questions. Whatever we get from the audience, I'll have a few myself, and we'll wrap things up from there. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to let you take the presentation over, and I will talk to you in a little bit.
Thanks very much, Doug. And thank you, Solutions Review, for having Rubrik today. It's a pleasure to be with you all to talk about this topic of data resilience. Really, we are living through a bit of a historic threat. Ransomware gangs are waging war against business data. And today we are going to look at the defense side of the equation, how you can keep your data secure and ultimately not pay the ransom if the worst has happened and you have this ransomware infection. As we mentioned in the intro, I'm a sales engineer at Rubrik, so I work with our existing customers, but also any kind of prospective customers to look at the technical side of Rubrik and how we can match that up with your business needs. I did mention as well that Rubrik is a data security company, and that's really where I wanted to start the presentation today. So defining in as specific terms as possible, what do we mean by data security? Really, I like to look at security through the lens of confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. And so this maps quite nicely onto the different pillars of Rubrik Security Cloud. But before we get into the security element, as defined with this CIA acronym, let's think about the data that Rubrik can protect. So Rubrik has a comprehensive coverage of different workloads. So whether your data is on-premise, think of a data center location, or whether it is in the public cloud or even SaaS data, Rubrik can cover those different locations. So for example, on-premise, it's very common for Rubrik to back up NAS data servers, whether they be physical or virtual. We support the major three public cloud providers, so Azure, AWS, and GCP. And in the SaaS world, we protect a lot of Microsoft 365 data as well. So that's the data part in a nutshell. And now let's think about how Rubrik can provide data security, thinking about that security part next. So those kind of three words, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Let's map these onto the pillars of the Rubrik Security Cloud, starting with data resilience, which really underpins everything else. And when I think of data resilience, I would encourage people to think of the worst case scenario. So let's say the burglars are inside the house, that is, the attackers are inside your network perimeter. How can you be sure that those attackers cannot tamper with or delete or encrypt your backup data itself? So that's where data resilience comes into play. And you do hear a chorus of backup vendors for this very reason, talking about the immutability of backups and how important that is. And that's something that we will get into today. So let's circle the eye of integrity and map it onto data resilience. And really, we're thinking about the integrity of backups on the one hand, but also the integrity of your production data. Because if that does become encrypted with ransomware, you can recover that production data using a good backup. And that really speaks to the next pillar, which is data remediation and therefore availability. Rubrik has a range of data restore options. It's a bit of a Swiss army knife of restoring data, if you will. But a theme throughout is there are options to very quickly get your data back. So your business can have the data as available as it needs to be, and you can quickly recover from a downtime event. So Rubrik kind of checks that box of providing the availability of data in that way. And then the third pillar here, which is right in the center of the screen, is what we call data observability. So this is where Rubrik can layer on some clever scanning technology on top of the kind of basic job of backing up data. And Rubrik can then search for things like ransomware. We have ransomware investigation, but also we can do threat hunts, looking for more specific threats within your backup data. But I think the feature of Rubrik's data observability, which most speaks to protecting the confidentiality of data, is our ability to search for sensitive data. So if I just circle the C and map that onto data observability, Rubrik can find the presence of sensitive data within the backup data and therefore show to you where sensitive data resides on your network. And you can check, is that exactly where you want that sensitive data to be and nowhere else? I think just before we leave this slide, if we see at the bottom the mention of zero trust design, that is going to be a theme for today. So as well as giving you a look at Rubrik, and we will log into the Rubrik Security Cloud shortly, I also want to make sure that we're looking at everything through the lens of design principles, which you can then compare to your existing setup and just challenge of your existing provider. Are you meeting certain very important zero trust requirements? So what are those zero trust design requirements? Well, we have three of them on this slide, which we'll talk through. And these are not everything, but if you don't have these three things for your backup data, then you really would struggle to say that you have resilient data. So starting in the middle with immutability, this is actually a simple concept. Something is immutable if it cannot be edited. So I'll just circle that because that's the requirement we want to tick for backup data, We don't want to give attackers the possibility of editing your backup data. If they can do that, they can then encrypt your backup data, and that could make a ransomware event an unrecoverable event. Sadly, we have seen examples of this. Travelex got hit with ransomware, limped on for some time, and then ultimately had to close its doors, all due to a ransomware infection. So immutability is key, but just because a backup is immutable, that doesn't mean that it can't be deleted or otherwise expired by attackers. That's a separate requirement, really. If we look at the pillar now of a retention lock, what a retention lock means is backups cannot be deleted or expired. And what we mean by expired is the backup system cannot be tricked into thinking the time is much later than it actually is in the present day. And so therefore your backups will not be deleted by any kind of retention policy you have. So those requirements are key, but we also need to think about the default posture of the backup data as it lives on your network. And that's where this concept of an air gap comes into play. And this term air gap does get thrown about quite a lot. So I've tried to be really clear by listing out three different types of air gap, if you like, that could be in place on this slide here. So on the left-hand column at the top, it may be the case that you have no air gap. And by that, I would say the backups are online. They are on a file system that is browsable and mountable from a compromised host within your network. And that's really not a good idea. It's not good security posture. So best to avoid not having any air gap at all. But if we go to the other extreme and think about a physical air gap, yes, this is more secure, but a physical air gap can be very slow to recover from. So if you have your backups on something like tape, yes, that's a physical air gap, but it could take so long for you to recover from tape that the downtime is very costly. And therefore, it may not be the best backup architecture for that reason. So Rubrik has gone for really the middle way here. We have a logical air gap. So yes, when we put a Rubrik data vault into a customer environment, it is physically connected to the network, and therefore you can very quickly recover from a Rubrik backup. But that Rubrik data vault is not freely browsable or mountable from any host on the network. Attackers or anyone else for that matter cannot just access data once it is safely inside that Rubrik data vault. So those are some of the zero trust design requirements. And to think about why does this matter? Well, let's compare a legacy backup architecture with that Rubrik data vault approach. So on the left-hand side, we have a representation of legacy backup architecture. And really, this is a storage-first approach where backup software is a user of storage. And therefore, if your storage is compromised, the backups themselves will be compromised. And sadly, that is what we see in many attacks. Not only does the production data get impacted, but the backup data gets impacted as well. And this can be a consequence, sadly, a quite predictable consequence of not having things like an air gap, not having proper immutability, or perhaps not having a retention lock against your data. And then on the other side, we have Rubrik's approach, so I'm just about to go into in a bit more detail, but the upshot of the Rubrik approach is that any data you have safely stored within Rubrik, you'll be able to recover from that because it will not be impacted in an attack. So as I move on to the next slide here, this is going to go into the design principles of a Rubrik data vault in some more specific terms. And this is really what we mean when we talk about zero trust. It's all of these things we've very deliberately done in the design of a Rubrik data vault. So this is going to focus on Rubrik protecting data within data centers, really. As I mentioned earlier on, we can protect data within the public cloud, we can protect data within SaaS, and we've taken every effort to build that in the right way, where Rubrik's offering is SaaS, it's cloud-to-cloud backup, and we keep it secure. But sadly, what we see in many attacks is attackers will actually get into the data center and they will actually compromise data there. So let's think about how Rubrik can protect against that. And really, right at the foundation here, Rubrik is providing the operating system, and the operating system is not Windows. It's a very common theme in ransomware attacks that anything Windows gets absolutely obliterated in the attack. So you don't really want your backup system running on Windows. So Rubrik has its own proprietary build of Linux. This is a hardened operating system. And what we mean by that is everything that is unnecessary to the backup job has been stripped away. So in so doing, we have minimized the attack vectors against the appliance we are providing. Rubrik is responsible for the software upgrades and the patching. And this is very key as well, because you are only ever as secure as your most recent upgrade. So we can upgrade the Rubrik cluster with no downtime. So we'll just upgrade one node at a time, and you can keep running during that process. So on top of this secure OS, we have the air-gapped and immutable file system that allows us to check those requirements I mentioned a couple of slides back. And then on top of that, we don't have any third-party applications. And this, again, is a very deliberate design choice. When it comes to the scanning that we do, looking for sensitive data, for example, we didn't want to be reliant on a third party to have that technology, because of the supply chain risk that's very much in the press in security these days. There have been high profile attacks where things like SolarWinds software has been compromised, and that's led to a supply chain risks for businesses using SolarWinds software. Rubrik wanted to avoid that situation by really taking control of as much of the software stack as possible, and that's the reason for this mention of no third-party applications. Data backed up to Rubrik is encrypted, encrypted at rest and in transit, and our customers can themselves provide a key management server that manages the key rotation for that. And then next we have always on built-in MFA. This is very important because Rubrik does not provide direct access to the operating system. We don't provide shell access to our customers, and therefore we can't provide it to attackers either if attackers have compromised those customer accounts. But what we do provide is access to this Rubrik Security Cloud interface, which we will go through in just a moment. So it's very important that we protect that access to the Rubrik Security Cloud interface. And we do so with our own MFA. Now, in a true zero trust design, we don't have to be reliant on your MFA. Rubrik provides its own MFA to secure the interface. And you'll notice as well that this acronym RBAC, standing for role-based access control, and this ties in with the MFA, because if you have the role of a backup admin, MFA is enforced against your login. And then at the top, we have a retention lock and NTP protection, and I'll explain what we mean by both of these things. Firstly, a retention lock, there was a brief mention of it earlier on. This is how we protect against your backups being deleted. Because if an abnormal change is requested, for example, if you want to really shorten the retention period for your backup data, you will have to go via Rubrik support to make that change. And it's a process then involving human beings, right? Human beings in the Rubrik support team will look into the request. They will actually reach out to the person you have, or people rather, that you have designated in your organization who are authorized to say, yeah, go ahead and make this change. And then once we get that authorization, an auto-expiring token is generated, which you can then use to go ahead and make the change against the retention policy. So we've taken every effort there to make sure the retention lock cannot be circumvented by attackers. And the NTP protection, just to explain a bit more what we mean by this, NTP, for anybody not familiar, stands for Network Time Protocol. Quite a few backup systems will reach out to an NTP server to effectively work out what time it is. And this leaves those systems vulnerable to an NTP poisoning attack, where an attacker will take over an NTP server. They'll essentially jump the clock. So rather than having the time say, the year is 2023, they'll make it be 2053 on that NTP server. And then the backup system will see, oh, it's 2053. I'll have to go ahead and delete my backups because I'm not supposed to keep them that long as per policy. So for this reason, Rubrik avoids having an NTP server in the mix. What we do instead is the Rubrik Data Vault uses a monotonic clock within the Linux subsystem to work out what time it is. And this monotonic clock, it looks at the passage of time. So we know that perhaps not enough seconds have passed for it really to be 2053 today. So that's a bit of detail about the zero trust design principles that underpin Rubrik. Hopefully that's a good introduction that applies, not just to thinking about Rubrik, but to thinking about designing any system you might want to put in place for protecting data. What I will come on to next is a bit of a demo of the Rubrik Security Cloud, and we're going to look at some of these capabilities. Obviously, we've gone through zero trust data protection. We can now start to look at everything Rubrik layers on top of that, particularly thinking about the scenario of a ransomware attack and how Rubrik can allow you to respond to that by investigating ransomware within your backup data, discovering sensitive data, and then even doing some more specific things around hunting for threats. So if I bring up the Rubrik Security Cloud, let me just bring up the global dashboard first of all. This is a demo environment. It's a Rubrik Security Cloud instance, which is the control plane here for 9 clusters that you can see are implemented all over the world. So protecting different bits and pieces of data, right? If I hover over cloud, you can see this particular Rubrik Security Cloud is paired with an AWS account, with Azure, even with GCP. We are also protecting SaaS in the shape of M365 data. And then we are backing up quite a few data center workloads as well. I can show you perhaps even more clearly what we are backing up if I go to the inventory section. And within here, I can see this Rubrik Security Cloud is paired with 2 vCenters, and within that, backing up 137 virtual machines, also backing up some Hyper-V VMs. So there are some diverse workloads here. So this may well resemble your environment. Certainly, lots of the customers I work with are hybrid in the sense that they work with Rubrik to protect on-premise cloud data as well. So if I click into perhaps SaaS and Microsoft 365, just wanted to give you a very brief look at, yes, we're protecting Exchange Online, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams here. There are obviously some setup required. There's some prerequisites to get to this step, and that's not really what I will focus on today. But if I go into the app tray and the settings, this is where you would be able to pair your data sources. So pair your vCenter, connect your cloud accounts, and what Rubrik can then go ahead and do is inventory those environments and show you the objects that are protectable within them. And you can then very simply set up your protection with Rubrik. Part of the appeal for me of Rubrik software is that it really makes protecting data very simple. If you want to back up an object, you just need to assign what we call an SLA domain. So an SLA domain will define the important components of data protection. So how often you want to back up, how long you want to retain those backups for, and you can also define things like an archival location for longer term storage. So this page here is just explaining in text what I just described, and I can then go through the wizard. I can say, look, I want this SLA domain to apply to, let's say, vSphere VMs, hit next, and then go ahead and define your snapshot windows. Every 12 hours, you might want to take a snapshot, and every 30 days, or rather for 30 days, you might want to retain those snapshots. So it's really very simple. You're just a few minutes setting up your SLA domains. And you can, as I say, turn on things like archiving. You can even go a step further and turn on things like replication for very critical workloads. And we can provide continuous data protection in some cases as well. So that's a brief look at how you would create an SLA domain. and then just apply that to your objects. So if I'm looking again at my inventory and looking perhaps at vSphere VMs, what I can do is I can apply my SLA domains at different levels. So I can have it applied to my cluster, and then anything that sits beneath that, so any VMs living in that cluster, will automatically inherit the SLA domain I've assigned. So there's a logic of inheritance that can work down from the folder level as well. And at the level of an individual virtual machine, if I need to, I can apply a different policy there, i.e. apply a different SLA domain. We're trying to make your life easier in terms of the operational side of things. So we do also have options around using tags. So I have some customers that will just simply have a kind of gold, silver, and bronze SLA domain defined within Rubrik, with gold being the most frequent backup schedule, and then bronze being perhaps less frequent. And then when a new VM is created, they'll just assign it the tag in vSphere that Rubrik knows to look for to then assign the relevant SLA domain. So that's a little bit about the setup. As I say, I won't go too deep into the setup because I want to turn this back to the worst case scenario, if you will, to a ransomware infection and how Rubrik can help you respond in that real time of need. So if I jump back to the global dashboard here, I can see, by the way, that are my objects in compliance with that administrator defined SLA domain, and it will highlight any objects that are out of compliance. But once I've got that backup data, Rubrik is going to start to look for certain things within that backup data. And right here on this dashboard, I can see in the last 24 hours, 9 anomaly events were detected. So let's pretend for a second this is your instance of Rubrik Security Cloud, right? It's backing up your environment. So it's quite important to then understand, what do we mean by 9 anomaly events? Well, as soon as a Rubrik backup completes, we start to look for the hallmark traits of ransomware. We don't just use a simple anomaly detection by looking at a data change rate. We actually go deeper. So if we're starting to see anomalous data change, we will also look for the signs of encryption and other signs that are present with ransomware. And then we can surface those anomaly events to you with more confidence. You can then go ahead and investigate exactly what is going on. So if I click investigate in this case, what I will start to see is the systems where we have detected suspicious activity in the time range that is specified over the left-hand side. So it's currently set to look at the past 24 hours. So you can see actually that there is a ransomware strain field, and what we are saying is that the ransomware strain lockbit is present on these systems. Lockbit being quite a well-known strain of ransomware. So Rubrik's even got the intelligence to look for the specific indicators of compromise we would associate with a given ransomware strain. So let's look into this a little bit more. As I say, this is, in our scenario, your systems, right, infected with ransomware. You will want to know the blast radius of the attack, and not just which systems have been impacted, but within each system, which files might have been encrypted. So if I jump into this system here, what I can see is not all drives were affected, but this Z drive or Z drive, depending on where you are in the world here, this is showing the suspicious activity, right? So I'm going to click into this Z drive, just browsing the snapshot that Rubrik has taken. And I can see again, within file shares, we have quite a lot of suspicious activity. So let's click in here. And within this view here, we can actually see Rubrik has detected a ransomware note. So Rubrik even has the intelligence to read the file itself and say, well, we think this is the ransom note left by the attacker. And yes, this very much does look to be the case, because I can see it's a restore my files.txt file. So you can expect to see instructions from the attacker on how to pay the ransom. Obviously not what you want to do. So let's think about recovering your data. First, you want to know what has been impacted, right? So you can download a CSV file that will show all the files that have been affected. For example, if I keep browsing into this HR department folder, I can see the suspicious files all have an extension of .lockbit, which is the extension you would expect to see once the file has been encrypted by the lockbit ransomware. So again, I can see exactly what files have been impacted. That CSV just listing the affected files, that could be great for any kind of forensic teams, or just great for a log of the blast radius of the attack. So put that to one side before you even start recovering the data. We do have options right within this view to recover the data, by the way. So we can recover the full snapshot, or we can just surgically recover individual files in different ways, such as downloading the file, pushing it back to its original location. So we have lots of options there. But first I'm going to kind of walk through a bit more the ransomware attack scenario, because so far, thanks to Rubrik, we can see, yes, we've been attacked, and we have a bit of an idea of the blast radius of the attack in terms of what has been encrypted on which systems. But these days, attacker tactics are even nastier than ever, I would say. And what attackers are doing is they are looking for sensitive data even before they execute the ransomware payload. Once they are inside your network, they will start to look for sensitive data. And if they find it, they will try to exfiltrate it. And that's because they want to have a second way to extort you. And they will threaten to publicly leak the sensitive data if you don't pay the ransom. So therefore, it becomes important to answer the question, if an attacker has access to a certain system, as is the case here, because we can see the attacker has encrypted it, has that attacker also accessed sensitive data, i.e. was there sensitive data on this particular system? So if I just perhaps come out to the Z drive here and kind of hover over this file shares location, you'll see over the right hand side, I have this option to view this in what we call data discovery. And this is where Rubrik will be scanning for sensitive data within your backup data set. And specifically, it's scanning this snapshot at this time, the system that the attacker had access to. So there's a joined up workflow here where we've shown you, yes, there was a ransomware infection, but now I click a button and I can see what sensitive data may have been present on that system. And that HR department folder, the one that we looked inside and saw all of those .lockbit files, you can see that is showing sensitive hits. So you can be pretty certain the attacker did have access to sensitive data here. And this is sensitive data defined by you as the Rubrik customer. So you tell Rubrik what to look for, right? It could be quite generic PII, personally identifiable information, or it could be something more specific like HIPAA. In fact, if we look at the classification over the right-hand side for this folder we have in our current view, I can see, as well as UK PII, I'm seeing HIPAA data. We can look for lots of different things. And we have pre-built analyzers to look for this data. So just turn on whatever makes sense. On top of that, you can use custom analyzers. So if there's a particular thing that you want to see, then go ahead and build a custom analyzer to look for that. So this could be your intellectual property, for example, that you want to search for within backup data. We also have this users tab, so we can show which users might have had access to this particular location. Because if an attacker has compromised a user account, you'll want to know what that user account could access in terms of compromised, in terms of sensitive data in this case. So that's a little bit about sensitive data discovery. I'll just briefly take you onto the management tab, because this is where you would either use the pre-built that's shown here as predefined analyzers that look for sensitive data, or you would build your own just by adding another analyzer and then tag that into policies that you would then ask to look for whatever it is you're looking for, such as a Australian tax file number within your data sets. So we now have an idea of the scope of the attack, not just in terms of the encryption, but also in terms of sensitive data that may have been in scope. But unfortunately, that's not the end of the story in terms of dissecting how you have been attacked. What attackers will do is they will very often install first stage malware to your environment. You can think of this as a backdoor that will give the attacker persistent access to your environment. And very often they will install this, and then they'll pivot from there to do some reconnaissance, find your sensitive data, exfiltrate it, and then when they are good and ready, execute that malware payload. Really, what you need to understand is at which point can you recover. So you need to be able to find the snapshots you have that are before any presence of malware within your system. So for this very reason, we've created a Rubrik threat hunt where you can search for the ransomware tools that attackers may have installed in your environment. If I go to ransomware monitoring and go to investigations, rather than just looking for anomalies, which the Rubrik system will do automatically, let's do a threat hunt and be more specific about what we are looking for here. And specific by defining Yara rules, by defining your particular file hashes or file patterns to look for. So you can then see, were threats present in your environment at a certain date. You will then, once you've defined your threat hunt in terms of what to look for, say, scan against a single system or multiple systems, either for the most recent snapshot or an entire time series of backups. So if I exit out of this, let's see which other kind of threat hunts have already completed here. So this one over here looks interesting. It's got 6 matches. Let's click into it. And you can see the parameters for this threat hunt was a Yara rule, so just a script that will look for something specific. You can see in the description, this is detecting lockbit ransomware. So it's even looking for that .text ransom note that we discussed earlier. So how to recover files .text. It will even look for that. And there have been matches in this environment. And the key thing really to understand is the earliest match snapshot, because obviously you want to recover to a point in time before that earliest match snapshot, because that was an instance where the threat was present in your environment. So you certainly want to go before that when you come to recover. So in terms of recovery, if I open the app tray, we've been through quite a few of these different elements already, right? We've been through data protection, right? Ingesting data and storing it safely. We've been through a bit of ransomware monitoring, both in terms of anomalies and more specific threat hunts. And then really next up to get your data back is what we call orchestrated recovery. And this is where ahead of time you can create recovery plans. So you can think of these as recovery blueprints. They're an automated way to get your systems back online. So if you are booting multiple systems from a Rubrik backup, you can define the boot order. You can run some scripts that might get those systems into a kind of production ready state and have that automated ahead of time. So if I look at perhaps an in-place recovery plan, there's one here I can see that's going to work on 2 virtual machines, and I would just hit a button to start an in-place recovery using this recovery plan. So Rubrik does give you the tools to very quickly recover your data, but we do realize as well that this is a very stressful time if you have been impacted, and also attacks can be sophisticated, and to understand an attack can be quite complex. So for these reasons, we've created the rapid recovery team within Rubrik. So this is a team within support that you can pick the phone up and call any time, and you'll be put straight through to a group of professionals who are charged with getting our customers' systems back online. Excuse me. So you can then work with that team to go through every step of the recovery process. So it's partly because of this support we have for our customers that we have in fact, a warranty, a ransomware guarantee that you'll be able to get your data back in the event of a ransomware attack. And this goes up to $5 million. That's how confident we are that we can get your data back should you be impacted by the kind of ransomware event we've been discussing today. Okay, so I did mention we'd be taking a brief look at all of these different components here. So I think the last component to think about is what we call the Data Security Command Center, which is slightly different really in the sense that it allows you to be proactive in the fight against ransomware. So if I click into it, I'll show you what I mean by that. When Rubrik has backed up a system, it will start to inspect that system to see if we can make any recommendations about how that system is protected. And we're going to give you a score out of 100, essentially showing your ransomware readiness. We call it a data security score. And we will suggest steps you can take to improve that score and therefore better maximize your Rubrik investment. So, for example, if I look at data protection and recovery and click into that, I can see a recommendation to increase the number of SLA domains. That's a backup policy, such as we looked at earlier on, that uses a retention lock. And that's another feature that we've discussed today. So if you take this action, you will increase your score here in terms of your data security. So just to finish off here, I would like to sum up the ways Rubrik can help. If I perhaps go back to this slide, with Rubrik, it all starts with data resilience, making sure that we have your data backed up to a zero trust architecture that keeps it secure from attackers. And then we can allow you to recover with this. If you do get impacted, our ransomware investigation will show you exactly how you've been impacted so that you're not in the dark and you know exactly the blast radius of the attack in terms of encrypted files, but also in terms of sensitive data that may have been accessed by attackers. And then we also can allow you to do threat hunting within your backup data set to find how attackers may have got into your system, where they may have installed their ransomware toolkit, so you can find and eliminate the presence of that by recovering to a clean backup. And we also allow, as well as automated recovery, things like isolated testing in a recovery process. So you can take a backup and recover it to a clean room, right? Isolated from the rest of your network, where you could do some forensic analysis and better understand how you've been attacked again. So if all of this sounds interesting, we would love to talk in greater detail with you about your particular data security posture, the lay of the land currently, and how Rubrik could help with that. So please reach out if this is of interest. We actually have our Rubrik Focus Forward event coming up very soon. That's the 17th of May. So by all means, tune in then. And yeah, we really look forward to talking with some of you and just understanding how Rubrik can help in this fight against ransomware. So thanks very much for your time and attention. I will hand back to Doug.
Well, thanks, Phil. That was a great walkthrough of Rubrik, and honestly, if people aren't scared to death at this point, I've got some more things to talk about. But with regard to the Rubrik Forward event, that is, just to be clear, that's a virtual event, so we would certainly encourage everybody to check that out. But with regard to ransomware and what you just went through, Phil, I mean, I quickly Googled ransomware and clicked on the news tab, and it's a horror show. There's Yum Brands 22 hours ago discloses a data breach after a ransomware attack. Jefferson County, Alabama, still offline. German super yacht maker targeted. There's gangs listed in stories around the world. Iranian gang, Oakland, still recovering, and actually the gang is releasing tranches of data because I'm assuming that they haven't paid. New Jersey police agency, I mean, it's a shocking amount. And this is, I mean, these are literally the first 2 pages, and this is literally not even 24 hours of news. Can you talk a little bit about, the level that you're seeing at this point within this? I mean, I don't think people truly understand just how prevalent this is.
It's absolutely endemic. So what you are reading there, Doug, just looking at the news around ransomware in a very recent time frame, that's the tip of the iceberg, because this is obviously what is hitting the press. But not all of the ransomware attacks will hit the press. And very often companies are perhaps reluctant to disclose that they have been impacted by ransomware. There is actually pressure on companies, though, to make that disclosure. We have bodies such as, if you think about regulations like the GDPR in Europe, which applies to any company that has European customers. If European citizens' data has been impacted in a data breach, then you actually have to make a disclosure to the ICO, to the Information Commissioner's Office, that you have been impacted. So it's not something that can be swept under the carpet. And this is just thinking about the disclosure angle and the kind of the compliance angle. But if you think about a business not being able to get its data back, where does that business go? Can they realistically reconstruct systems without their critical business data, or are they actually going to have to close down? It's just so costly to be impacted. So yes, there's a high volume of attacks, but also think about the cost of each attack to individuals and businesses.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's interesting to note that that part of the Rubrik story is really around the approach from day one of this kind of zero trust approach. And I think what we're seeing anyway is that there is kind of now a mind shift and an approach change where it used to be more of a trust but verify to now there's this really much more restrictive zero trust approach. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the Rubrik DNA with regard to that? Because I think it is interesting to note.
So the Rubrik DNA is assume breach, right? So we are assuming that our customers have already been breached, or at least at some point in the future they will be breached. We're certainly not saying do not spend on your other layers of protection. So of course you protect the network perimeter, you protect the network, and these multiple layers of security are really important. But sadly, even if you have those, you cannot guarantee you won't be breached at some point. Because do remember, the insider threat is very real. So you have privileged accounts that may get compromised by attackers, or it might just be a careless admin misconfiguring something, or it might sadly be a malicious admin. So particularly considering the insider threat, you do have to assume breach. And we've actually taken that assume breach mentality a stage further, because we're assuming breach at all different points in the chain and the process here. So we're not just blindly trusting any admin of the Rubrik system either. If that Rubrik admin is doing things like requesting that the retention period of backups be drastically shortened, as I described in the presentation, that admin will have to go through a process of contacting Rubrik support and having that verified with authorized individuals before the change is made. So really at every point in the chain, any point involving human beings, but also any point involving kind of software and systems, we're really trying to ensure that we are not just blindly trusting, but verifying where we can.
Well, we are getting a couple of questions, and one of the questions I think a lot of people have, and I'll keep it more general, but a lot of people have invested a lot of money in a lot of solutions outside of that are maybe not quite as aggressive as the Rubrik approach with assuming breach. And I think it's a fair question. How does Rubrik integrate with those other types of solutions? Obviously, you don't want to rip and replace everything. You do want to think about bringing things together and maybe just adding that extra layer of protection. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're certainly not suggesting you kind of rip out your existing security tooling. And in fact, Rubrik can sit as a last line of defense, right, behind everything, but also integrate with that other security tooling you might currently have in place. So if you think about something like a SIEM, if you're using Sentinel or if you're using Splunk, Rubrik can very happily integrate with those platforms. So you can start to see data from Rubrik within your existing SIEM, and we can integrate with lots of different tools. I mean, it just depends what customers have in place. If they're using ServiceNow, for example, I have quite a few customers that have nice ServiceNow workflows where they can manage aspects of Rubrik from ServiceNow. There's an even broader conversation around automation where Rubrik's APIs can be used by systems. So, if you're using Puppet or Ansible or other kind of config managers, those can certainly talk to Rubrik. So Rubrik is not an island. It's an island for your data, a safe island for your data. But in terms of the operational side, it will talk to whatever else you need it to talk to.
So another question that we're getting is, where are the Microsoft 365 backups stored?
Yes, so this is something that was touched on, I think, very briefly in the presentation, that we can back up M365 data. Very common for Rubrik customers to do that these days. The data actually stays within Azure, so there's no egress fees, but you decide the region within Azure that we will store your data in. And it's also stored in a different storage account to your normal storage account. So you have a bit of redundancy there, right? So if your main storage account was taken over, we have a safe copy of your data. Microsoft is actually an investor in Rubrik. They took an equity stake in us a few years back, and as well as there being that kind of financial arrangement, there's been a lot of collaboration between Rubrik and Microsoft. So we've really built our M365 protection in a way that makes sense to work with Microsoft. So using their APIs to be able to quickly back up, but more crucially, quickly restore data. So yeah, absolutely. If there are further questions about how we've architected that SaaS protection, just perhaps reach out after today. I mean, my email address is at the bottom there, and we'll be happy to chat that through.
Yeah, great. So it's interesting about the Microsoft investment, but can you speak a little bit about some of the other cloud platforms as well? Obviously, AWS and Google Cloud. I'm assuming that you have equally integrated solutions there.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have customers using all different public cloud platforms. So it's very common for Rubrik to back up workloads in AWS and GCP, as well as Azure. And I think the benefit of having something like Rubrik, if you do have data in these diverse locations, so let's say you have a multi-cloud strategy, you probably still have data on premise as well, and then you have perhaps both Azure and AWS, and you're running workloads there. The value of Rubrik in that scenario is not only can you back up those diverse workloads with Rubrik, but Rubrik is that control plane across the whole thing. So the Rubrik Security Cloud that I was demoing today, that's a SaaS UI that you can log into, and you can see at a glance the health of your enterprise data across these different locations, because we will surface, are we seeing ransomware in those different locations? And you can do things like define a global SLA domain. So across all your different workloads, how do you want to back them up? And it just becomes a lot easier for you to manage. And there's obviously a time saving and therefore possibly a cost saving in having that single pane of glass, which is the perhaps overused word in the industry, which Rubrik truly is, to be able to manage all your data.
Well, so let's talk about how folks start to, what they need to prepare for as they start to think about taking that next step and potentially contacting Rubrik and having a conversation with someone like yourself. What advice would you offer, and who would you offer that to in an organization? I mean, who are you engaged with, and what would you suggest they think about prior to having that conversation?
So these days, Rubrik very often engages with CISOs and other folk within the security organization. So Rubrik technology and the data resilience topic is definitely part of security these days, as well as, of course, still being part of an infrastructure conversation. So we tend to engage with kind of both sides of the house, infrastructure and security. And I think that's really healthy, rather than having just infrastructure. To have security as part of the conversation, I think it has the best outcome, I think, for the business. In terms of what I would prepare in advance, it's not so much looking at the kind of technical nuts and bolts in advance. It's more looking at the kind of business side of things. So working out the business purpose of certain systems and kind of going through an exercise of working out what the business impact would be if a system was to be offline. Because sometimes I talk to people and they're not really sure that the kind of recovery point objective or recovery time objective that makes sense. Can this system be down for 12 hours? Can it be down for 2 hours? Those are the questions that really need answering first, I would say, because that kind of underpins everything else. When we get into the technical part of it, that tends to kind of work itself out as we go down the road. But the business need, right, it is really foundational, I would say.
Excellent. And obviously the best way to begin a conversation, and you guys have had lots of conversations, 4,500 customers globally. A lot of those early conversations are with someone like yourself, yes?
Absolutely, yes. So anybody who wants to talk to us, right? So will typically be aligned with a Rubrik account manager, which is a great single point of contact for anything you might need Rubrik. And then a sales engineer, like myself, will be a technical point of contact. So just to understand the kind of technical systems you have in place and how Rubrik can play with those systems. So that's usually the core account team, right? An account manager and a sales engineer. And we're more than happy to have any sort of conversations around data security.
Excellent. Phil, this has been a great walkthrough of Rubrik and an incredibly, I think, important overview of the threat that ransomware poses across the table right now. I want to thank you very much for the time today, and best of luck in the rest of the year.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Solutions Review.
Well, there you have it, another solution in our spotlight. We want to thank Phil and Rubrik for their fine presentation today, and we appreciate your participation as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.